Welcome to KMET 1490 AM ABC News Radio and the Southern California Business Report with Yvette Walker, a show dedicated to highlighting successful Southern California businesses and the people behind them.
Welcome and thank you for joining Southern California Business Report on ABC News and Talks, KMET 1490 AM, 98.1 FM, and KMET TV. I'm Yvette Walker, live, blasting our signal from the center of Southern California, serving a population of over 25 million. Get us crystal clear and on demand by downloading the free live streaming app on Google Play and the Apple App Store. As always, a huge, tremendous shout out to the team, Mitch, Bill, and Sean. I love you guys. And to our special advisory committee that can be found at www.scbrtalk.com/advisory committee. Click on the link and learn about the incredible work being done. Speaking about incredible work being done, I am honored to introduce Alfred Fraijo Jr. He is owner and principal of the Somos Group. He founded Somos to spearhead innovative projects for clients that depend on partnerships and a broad range of disciplines in planning and law to reimagine urban placemaking. He specializes in managing the design and permitting of complex development projects for government and private sector clients. Under his leadership, a team of planners and consultants have developed some of the most transformative planning and research projects in urban communities spanning the commercial, residential, hospitality, and healthcare sectors. Prior to starting his own firm, Alfred was a senior partner at Shepherd Mullen, Richter and Hampton LLP, where he led the real estate and land use practice team in Los Angeles and served on the firm's executive committee. Alfred was born and raised in Los Angeles and is passionate about community service and serves on prominent organizations advancing urban redevelopment and social equity. He is a leader in the Latinx and LGBTQ communities, serving on the executive boards of the Los Angeles LGBTQ Center, the California Community Foundation, and is the founder of Inclusive Action for the City, Incorporated, a multidisciplinary nonprofit organization advocating for equitable land use and sustainable development policies. Alfred serves as president on the board of directors for the Friends of the Hollywood Freeway Central Park, and he advises several nonprofit housing development corporations, serving as a board member of California Community Builders and the Los Angeles LGBT Center. In addition, he is a founding board member of Honor, PAC, and For People of Color, a nonprofit organization dedicated to growing diversity in the legal profession. Alfred has a bachelor's degree from Harvard University and a Juris Doctorate from Loyola Marymount University. Thank you so much for being with us today, Alfred.
Thank you, Yvette. It's an honor to be with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So as we were talking prior to starting our conversation, when we scheduled this conversation, it was over a month ago. The discussion was going to be a lot different than it's going to be today. And quite frankly, it's heartbreaking and devastating to think of everything that lies ahead for the city of Los Angeles and surrounding areas. But divine intervention, you're here, you're going to share your expertise and a proposed pathway forward as we reimagine, right, the future of Los Angeles. So with that said, Alfred, please talk about your background in growing up in Los Angeles and what led you to take on law, planning, and land use?
Thank you. Well, absolutely, Yvette. Let me start off by saying that our hearts go out to the families that have been impacted by these terrible wildfires. And we are hard-pressed to think about the recovery when so many people are still worried about the evacuation orders and frankly, just monitoring the current fires. But I do think that it's important to have this conversation on the opportunities for reimagining a stronger Los Angeles region and taking the experiences that we're learning from just the past couple week and a couple of days on what we could do differently. My work is centered around city building. I like to say that we operate at the center of city building and social equity. We approach urban development through a lens of equity, inclusivity, and sustainability. And our work is very much in alignment with the topic that we're going to discuss with your listeners today as it relates to rebuilding a more resilient region. The reason why I got involved in this is that I learned early on in my civic engagement growing up in Boyle Heights that local government has a very strong role in the way that communities are built and where resources are invested and directed. And I thought that I could, absent being a local elected official, be an agent and a partner for communities that needed further attention and investment, like Boyle Heights, like other areas of Los Angeles that have been historically underinvested and are marginalized. And so I took it upon myself to learn about the land use policies that informed our built environment, and also how myself as an expert in that space could be effective champion for change. And I thought being a land use attorney would be the perfect combination. I think it has the elements of being both an expert in local land use rules, understanding community needs, understanding policymaking, and have the technical skills to interpret the current code to propose revisions and modernizations to it. And in the course of my practice as a land use attorney, I also had the unique perspective in thinking about how, as a partner to my clients that were building various projects in the range of uses, whether it was commercial or residential or other types of uses, that they were calling upon me to make recommendations on other experts, in addition to lawyers, that could join the team. I'm referring to folks like planning professionals that have expertise in urban planning, architects and designers, those folks that have expertise in government, lobbying, et cetera. And I was building these teams, and I realized that for me to have an effective platform, I really needed to create that multidisciplinary set of experts in-house to be more impactful and more efficient in our services to our clients. And over the course of my career, I started coming up with some key elements that ultimately now comprise Somos Group. And as you mentioned in your introduction, we are truly a multidisciplinary platform, harnessing experts in different areas, whether it's government advocacy or land use and the law, to work with our clients to build stronger and more affordable communities as well. And so when we think about this recovery, I think that our region, our local governments, our business sectors, our community advocates, nonprofit groups, and philanthropy are going to come together. And certainly they're doing already to provide some relief to the folks that are most impacted by the fires, to come together and come to a consensus on how we should rebuild. And I think that when those conversations happen in earnest, we will need a platform like Somos to leverage a variety of expertise to provide the best in class solutions for what we think is going to be necessary for this new opportunity for us.
Absolutely. So in my previous life, or my background includes work as a planning commissioner for my local city. So voting through some of those proposed land use projects, residential and commercial. So give us a background for those that may not be familiar with the process and the various barriers that exist along the way. That's why, when I read your bio and I see that multidisciplinary team collaborative
Yes.
landscape, it looks like such a natural way to streamline the process and have all team members on board to ensure that things happen quickly, efficiently, and smoothly without disruptions in communication or thought processes or even goals.
Yes. And Yvette, well, thank you for that question, because I do think it's important for our audience to understand how we operate in this space of land use and land development. As you know, as a commissioner, you are constrained by the policies that are adopted and are in place. And what we know is historically those policies are slow to be updated and modernized. And so we have the tension between what we see as the need for more development, the need for more resilient development, and the code, the building code and the planning codes that exist today. I do think that over the course of the past few years, the state of California has, through the legislature, mandated the updates to the general plans that are supposed to govern long-term planning and long-term growth for our local cities. But what I think is important here is, notwithstanding those updates, it's often the case that a variety of voices are not considered in the preparation of those plans. So take, for example, as we think about the current fires and the reconstruction, what we know is that smart urban planning solutions really require the adoption of land use and zoning policies that allow for increased density in urban corridors, in commercial corridors. And what we see in the media and what we see in the discourse and planning commissions and city councils is that people are concerned about displacement. Folks are concerned about the impacts of higher density development. And what we need to do as a city, as a region, is have a sobering conversation about the fact that perhaps green sprawl, as it relates to building housing in vulnerable places like the ones we're seeing burned to a crisp, may not be the best solution. It may be important for us to build housing in greater number around transportation corridors, around public resources, so that we don't have the kind of shortages of either water or life supporting services in the canyons and the hillsides, as we're seeing play out in the past couple of days, unfortunately. And so what we see is really an opportunity to provide for a reset in thinking about those kinds of issues, in balancing the need of our communities around the mitigation that is important, as you can imagine, as a planning commissioner, around traffic and other types of potential impacts around higher density developments. But we see solutions there, as opposed to continuing to promote the kind of sprawl that we see, unfortunately, being built that creates that vulnerability that we talked about. The other thing that I would mention, Yvette, that's important for us to consider as we think about the future of Los Angeles is also to think about the inclusivity part, the diversity part. How do we integrate policies that really respond to the greatest need? So we're talking about domestic workers. We're talking about other workers that are obviously, in addition to the homeowners, are impacted by these fires. Are we adopting the necessary emergency orders to provide the kind of economic support that those marginalized or lower income families are going to need? Those are the kinds of questions that we at Somos are concerned about, and certainly working with our local elected officials, with our labor partners, in bringing to light the need for that level of inclusivity in our policymaking. I'm hopeful. I'm absolutely hopeful. I see the amount of goodwill that's being generated to help families in distress, the collaboration that's happening in different industries and sectors. So I always see the glass half full. I'm very optimistic. Obviously very concerned about the fires that are currently raging now, but really looking forward to having these kinds of conversations. And I appreciate the fact that you're bringing those to light today.
Certainly. And so you talk about sustainable design for vulnerable communities. And of course, that is going to include those that are on a different socioeconomic landscape, right? Which makes it conducive to having the high density closer to those transportation corridors and making it easier for people to travel to and from work. Talk about what those vulnerabilities look like prior to the fires and what you think they can be mitigated moving forward, or how you think they can be mitigated moving forward. What would that look like? Reimagine for us what that would look like when you think about, the Metrolink or other main arteries of transportation, freeways that flowed in and out of Los Angeles.
Absolutely. And what I see is, as prior to the fires, the kinds of things that we were working on as a company was bringing to light the fact that we have significant disparity in resources in our communities. Take, for example, the amount of time that our essential workers have to travel from where they live in homes that are affordable to where they work. And while we have a more robust transportation system, thanks to the growth that we see with Metro and the investment in new Metro lines, rail and bus, we know that there's significant barriers to accessing affordable housing in close proximity to where people work. And that really puts a strain on families, working families in particular. So when you have parents that are traveling 1 to 2 or even 3 hours of their day, it gives the family the inability to invest time that they would otherwise be able to in, say, extracurricular activities at school or participating in local community work, etc. And so we see that as systemic issues that are impacting the health of our communities. Related to that is also the growing wealth inequality in our community as well, the concentration of wealth, the fact that we have communities that are lower income and marginalized, most vulnerable to the climate change issues that are surfacing in our region, not just wildfires, but flooding as well. When you look at the red line maps that we had in the 50s and 60s of communities that were prohibited from getting a fair shake on mortgages or bank loans or business loans, where we had literal redlining on neighborhoods that were occupied by Black and brown families. You overlay those maps with current maps on vulnerable populations that are vulnerable to, say, flooding in South Los Angeles, there's almost identical correlation. Why is that? Those are the kinds of issues that as an organization, we have been exploring to make sure that resources are directed to those communities so that they can be built in manners that provide for that safety, whether it's building infrastructure that protect our communities from flooding or building more sustainable buildings that are fire resistant, that are adaptable to the climate change impacts that we see in our region. Those are the kinds of policy endeavors that we've been working with our clients. We also have spent, Yvette, a significant amount of time partnering with organizations that are looking at how we might build with greater density with also more affordable housing. We need housing that's affordable for working families. So inclusionary housing is a big component of our work, partnering with our local government to be able to do that. We think of those kinds of values and attention to the necessary policies around building resilient communities are going to be essential to the conversations that are taking place now. I'm gratified by the fact that I have been in touch with our local elected officials that are very interested in not doing business as usual when it comes to the rebuilding process in our region. Another aspect that I think, Yvette, is important to talk about is the issue around procurement as it relates to the enormous investment that we're likely to see thanks to our federal government and the state as well.
So you talk about these vulnerable communities, the working class communities, and affordable housing. How do you think that affordable housing will be realized once some of those barriers are eliminated? We hear some of our legislators talking about eliminating certain hurdles that are natural to development, which include the environmental impact reports and CEQA. Talk about how bypassing those stages is going to impact the bottom line of development moving forward. And, of course, expedite the process of building and rebuilding.
That's it, Yvette. Time is money. We know that a big part of the increase in costs is, of course, the cost of materials and the cost of labor, but it's also the amount of time and cost it takes to be able to get these projects shovel ready. So examples of that obviously include the California Environmental Quality Act that requires certain environmental studies. But when we have the right policies in place and the right studies in place around, as I mentioned, general plan updates, housing elements that are robust and innovative, that are inclusive of community voices, then developers can have the certainty that the rules in place have been vetted properly pursuant to those environmental studies that are necessary. But we want to make sure that local government does that homework up front, that we're not legislating by project, that we're doing comprehensive planning, that we're doing regional planning that takes into account that diversity of input that I mentioned. So once we have that in place, as is required by the state, then we can proceed on an expedited path. What does that look like? For us, what that is having certainty in the process. We've seen in the last couple of days a series of executive orders, both at the state level and as well as a local level with our Mayor Bass. What we want to see is working with our private sector clients is making sure that those executive orders are implemented in ways that we think meet the spirit and the letter of those orders. So that means working with the planning department, working with the building departments to ensure that they don't default to the typical red tape that we often see, creating the kinds of barriers that either cost capital rather, or take time, which in essence both create that level of barriers for the development. So one of the things is streamlining the environmental review. Number two is creating certainty. Number three is having a level of expedited review that everybody can agree to. It shouldn't take 12, 24, sometimes 36 months to build an apartment building in a highly urbanized area. It should be much more streamlined. And we see that smaller cities embracing that level of innovation and showing us the way out of the bureaucratic barriers that we see often in big cities. It shouldn't be the case that if you go to a city in the Central Valley or even in the Bay Area, you can go and present a project and have that project approved in 6 weeks or 9 weeks. If you do the same in other jurisdictions that are larger perhaps and more bureaucratic, it can take anywhere from 6 to 9 months as opposed to weeks. And I think that this crisis is allowing us to look hard at those policies and really evaluating whether they resulted in better outcomes. And we see that what we have built is still vulnerable to these climate challenges. What we need to do is really create additional guidance to our developers so that they integrate that level of innovation in their buildings. We know that they're willing to do that so long as local government can have a clarity as to what's required and have a commitment that we're going to work hand in hand to get these projects approved quickly.
Absolutely. There's so many layers to this conversation and to the development process, as you mentioned. Just briefly, what would you recommend to expedite, through CEQA, through the EIRs, as you work with the development agency within Los Angeles and surrounding communities to say, look, we don't have time to go through the whole process, but we have a laundry list of what our expectations are for our developers. As long as they can sign off on meeting this, we can expedite and push these projects forward. What recommendations do you give the city of Los Angeles, surrounding communities, and planning departments in Southern California to expedite and quickly streamline these projects?
Number one, I would say, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. It is sort of that magic wand question, but it really is true today. In other words, we are having to confront with those challenges. So that's why I appreciate the question. I would say immediately what we can do is unlocking the pipeline that currently exists of projects that are currently under review by building departments across the region to say, hey, can we commit the necessary staffing and resources to get these projects through the pipeline and ready for construction? That would unlock thousands of residential units that would be available for families that have been displaced, that are available for essential workers that want to live near where we know the reconstruction is going to occur. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is, in the same way that our Mayor Karen Bass has already proposed, is a full-on assault with our cabinet level individuals and leaders of the various departments, meeting with the private sector and saying, how can we create a process that takes you from a no to a yes? Oftentimes, we see our appointed and our staff folks really having a hard time getting to an expedited review process because there's no level of accountability at the local level. So giving our staff people that are working really hard the necessary coverage through the adoption of emergency orders that allow them to quickly process these permits is going to be critical. The other thing I would say, finally, Yvette, what I would add is that we need to start thinking beyond those neighborhoods that were devastated by the fire. The executive orders currently really focus on the reconstruction of those buildings that existed before the fires. I would like to take that a step further and really explore an opportunity to expedite not just the construction in those areas, but throughout areas that are vulnerable to potential fires, hillside areas where owners and organizations have been saying, we want to get the necessary permits to pursue fire suppression, to pursue some of the abatement work that's going to be necessary that's been hampered by the local bureaucracy. I do think we need to take that additional step to look at those additional neighborhoods.
All right. With that said, we are on a break, Alfred. Yvette Walker with ABC News and Talk Southern California Biz Report, speaking with Alfred Fraijo Jr., owner and principal of Somos Group, as he sheds light on his pivotal role in community development and zoning in Los Angeles. He reflects on the far-reaching impact of the ongoing devastating fires, revealing how these tragedies will reshape neighborhoods, launching discussions on sustainable rebuilding. When we return.
Hi, I'm Dana Rademacher with MGR Property Management.
A lot of people wonder about the value that property management has for their property. Property management can include all property types, including residential, commercial, and HOA. It is valuable because property managers are experienced in what can happen at your property. We're aware of liabilities. We're able to do predictive and preventative maintenance. We know what is coming up with the changes in the weather, the seasons, how old certain aspects or different capital projects at your property are. We're able to best negotiate contract pricing, legalities with your tenants, and anything else that you may need to ensure that you're getting the full value of your property.
If you're interested in speaking with the representative at MGR Property Management regarding your property management needs, you can visit our website at mgrrealestate.com, or you can call our number at area code 909-581-6600 to be connected with the representative.
Ontario International Airport is on to a better way to fly with over 65 daily nonstop flights to more than 20 major destinations and the easiest airport experience in Southern California. Visit flyonto.com/Ontario to learn more about Ontario International Airport today.
Hi, I'm San Bernardino County Sheriff Shannon Dykes. If you're looking to start an exciting career in law enforcement and make a difference in your community, we are hiring dispatchers, nurses, deputies, laterals, and many more. For a complete list of our jobs and more information, visit sheriffsjobs.com.
The University of La Verne is rated first in California for alumni satisfaction. Learn more about accelerated programs offered online and on campus in La Verne, Irvine, Ontario, Burbank, or College of the Canyons. Visit go.laverne.edu. The University of La Verne. go.laverne.edu.
Cal State San Bernardino is home to the only school of entrepreneurship in California. With globally ranked degree programs, you can start your journey today to become a successful entrepreneur. Learn more and connect at entre.csusb.edu.
We are the Empire Strikers, the professional sports team of the Inland Empire. We are a fast-actioned and community-inspired pro indoor soccer team. Our mission is to inspire the Empire. Home games, community events, watch parties, and youth camps are all back. Professional indoor soccer is back. Join us and come watch the greatest show on turf at Toyota Arena or on Twitch. Visit www.theempirestrikers.com for more and any information.
Welcome back, everyone. Yvette Walker with ABC News and Talk Southern California Business Report, here today with Alfred Fraijo Jr., owner and principal of Somos Group, as he sheds light on his pivotal role in community development and zoning in Los Angeles. He reflects on the far-reaching impact of the ongoing devastating fires, revealing how these tragedies will reshape neighborhoods, launching discussions on sustainable rebuilding. Thank you so much for being with us today, Alfred.
It's great to be with you, Yvette.
Perfect. So prior to the break, we had a discussion about an overview of what the process looks like today, the development process, the different barriers that exist within planning, within zoning, and what your ideas are in terms of bypassing some of those hurdles to streamline future and existing development plans to get them, as you said, shovel ready, breaking ground, and expediting these projects forward. Now, when we talk about that, we were also discussing the more vulnerable communities that maybe don't have the means to stay at a hotel for 4 or 5 months during the time that their home is being rebuilt or their neighborhood is being rebuilt. There are so many vulnerable communities that are and have been affected by these unprecedented fires. Talk about what that economy looks like in this landscape.
Thank you, Yvette. And I appreciate the question because I do think we need to shed light on very vulnerable populations that may not be as visible in the kinds of images we're seeing of the devastation. We're obviously really focused on homeowners and residents of the areas that have been impacted. But we also have to think about the local economy that is devastated as a result of these fires. When we think about domestic workers or childcare workers, gardeners, retail workers of the businesses that were destroyed by the fire, we know that our essential workers and other low-income families are working paycheck to paycheck. And they're one paycheck away from an economic crisis in the family. And so we got to think about that. I'm working with organizations like the California Community Foundation that has been making a call to action to the philanthropic community and our donor community to be able to support organizations that are providing direct relief to those families that have been impacted. And direct attention to them, I think, is critical, especially in the next couple of months. But let's also take time to reflect on the fact that we are living in times where these workers are not getting a fair wage, where these workers continue to live at the precipice of economic disaster, notwithstanding some of the policies that have been adopted. And so the reality is that we do have very vulnerable communities. These natural disasters are just highlighting that fact, and we need to begin the work of tackling those systemic issues. How do we do it? We're very, very proud of the fact that we have been working with organizations that are looking at ways of bolstering our local economy with a workforce that is paid a fair wage, that is paid a wage that allows them to not only support their families, but create generational wealth and create economic stability that allows them for longer term prosperity. Those are the kinds of policy efforts that we have been focused on. Just recently, Yvette, we launched a nonprofit affiliate called SAFER, which is Somos. It's an economic resilient organization that's really focused on bringing attention to the quality of jobs that are being created in the local economy and making sure that we're prioritizing businesses and industries that are generating jobs that will allow for that economic and social mobility that we need in our region. And so those kinds of issues, I think, as I mentioned, are only highlighted by the immediate crisis, but are systemic in our community, and we have to find ways to solve it. The other thing that I would mention is the fact that we continue to build in areas that are not in urban centralized communities, that green sprawl or development in vulnerable hillsides continues to be an issue. We think that there's a way of balancing the opportunity for growth in those areas with the kind of innovation that we see in some of the building standards that we've seen in other states that could be adopted in California. So fire-resistant buildings that for the construction of buildings in the hillsides, I think are critical. Creating defensible spaces in those areas that allow for fire suppression and resistance of the spread of fires, I think is critical. What I think this crisis calls for is a commitment to not doing things business as usual, to be innovative. Our organization is very focused on that. We have a mantra that we want to lead with ideas We want to focus our attention to innovation and experimentation. And we think local government can do just that. We can't be afraid of failure. We really have to operate at the vanguard of what we think is necessary to continue to address these kinds of critical issues in our neighborhoods, whether it comes to economic development, prosperity as it relates to education and the health services that are so critical to our community. The affordability issue, of course, is a big factor. All those things that will continue to bog down the prosperity in our region are things that Somos is focused on tackling.
Right. And there are just countless people that have been impacted by this. And I mean, there's so many opportunities to obviously going to have to rebuild. But what are your thoughts and what is the sense that you're getting in terms of the possibility of overhauling the general plan of some of these communities? Because for all intents and purposes, many of these areas, you're starting off with a clean slate, so to speak, right? With the opportunity to rebuild and possibly rezone in some areas. What are you hearing along those lines?
Absolutely. What I'm beginning to do is have conversations with our policymakers about the need to do comprehensive planning before we move into reconstruction. Is that as it relates to the coastal communities or the communities that are currently impacted, mountainside communities, et cetera, having a real conversation about the amount it's going to cost to be able to promote these kind of more resistant building interventions. We know that it's going to cost more money to do it, but we know that they're going to be safer and better able to withstand these kinds of emergency conditions. So one is resisting the impetus to build immediately, is to take deliberate steps to do that comprehensive planning. And we don't think that's necessarily resulting in a delay, but it is doing what we are currently doing at Somos, which is bringing multiple disciplines to the table to find ways to do things better, to do it faster, as we talked about earlier. We know about the executive orders that the governor has issued and the mayor has issued in Los Angeles. They're calling upon their experts to make recommendations on how they can improve those orders. We are looking forward to working with them to make those kinds of recommendations effective and responsive to the need of wider communities. We need to be inclusive of voices of those vulnerable workers and residents that we know oftentimes get excluded from those conversations. That's really key. The other thing I'd like to mention is that I think is important for your listeners is that we acknowledge the fact that there's going to be a tremendous influx of capital that's going to come to this area thanks to the support of the president on down. We want to make sure that that capital is distributed and invested in ways that's equitable. We want to make sure that it's focused on diverse businesses, that it's focused on small businesses, that minority-owned businesses get a fair shake and fair opportunity at government contracts for that rebuilding process. That's going to be really important. We know that the current rules around procurement favor larger organizations that are more resourced, and it doesn't ultimately result in even investing in companies that are based in Los Angeles. And so we want to make sure that we take very deliberate steps to broaden the lens around local procurement that ensure prosperity for those businesses that need it most. Those are businesses that are local, that are more likely to hire locally and invest locally. Those are the business we want to invest in.
Right. So talking about, again, the vulnerable communities, which also happen to be in large part the backbone of our local economies, right? Taking care of our kids, our homes, doing the work that we don't do because we're invested in other efforts. What resources are available to them today if they're listening? Those that are listening, those that may not understand or know where to begin or how to navigate the next steps, what is, an ABC outline that they can follow to be guided in the right direction?
Thank you for the opportunity. Absolutely. The first thing I would say is that somosgroup.org, our organization, is putting together a webpage with resources for local businesses and community that need the kind of immediate attention on the how-to, for instance, whether their business is devastated or they've lost income as a result of this, the wildfires. And so I would encourage your listeners to go to our website to get more information on the latest information from various agencies that are focused on providing the support. The other thing I would recommend that your listeners consider is going to the California Insurance Commissioner's website. I've spoken directly to the Insurance Commissioner Lara about his efforts to provide the necessary information and technical support to vulnerable families, homeowners, and business owners in the region. He's provided really robust resources online that are available on his website. I would also encourage your listeners to consider visiting the LA Economic Development Corporation website, LAEDC. In particular, if you have a small business, the LAEDC has provided guidance on how you might handle this emergency condition, from things you might consider about accessing federal relief funds, from providing support to your employees that obviously might be out of jobs, to other kinds of small loans that could be essential to stabilizing the crisis that currently exists for those businesses that are impacted. So LAEDC, I would mention also the Insurance Commissioner's website, and of course our website, somosgroup.org, for additional resources. And finally, I would say that one of the things that's really important to continue to be vigilant as it relates to the fires that are currently happening. We're not out of the woods yet. There's a number of websites like Watch Duty that I know so many Angelenos are glued to for the latest developments on the containment of these fires. That's obviously really critical, particularly for communities that are in proximity to the fires.
Right, Alfred. So we talked about everything that is currently happening. There's so many moving parts, so many fluctuations, but let's focus on the importance of the community engagement element. You mentioned early on that you recognized and valued how local government really is the driving force to communities. And please share the importance of these local communities showing up and having their voices heard and having a stake in the planning, in the design, in the reimagination of the communities that are going to be planned to support them and to serve them. Please talk about those opportunities and why it's so important to engage.
Absolutely. The opportunities for reimagining our communities and our neighborhoods impacted by these wildfires, I think, is tremendous. We have already been innovating in that space and thinking about how we engage community differently to have more effective input, connecting our stakeholders to the decision makers. Number one is to have an expansive view of who should be included. We recognize the fact that because communities, especially families that are impacted or are vulnerable economically, they're not going to have the kind of time that other families might as it relates to being able to sit down at a charrette or a community meeting. So finding other ways of accessing these residents is going to be critical. Using technology, using social media, using other tools that we've deployed as an organization to more effectively either communicate information or solicit information is critical. Two is that oftentimes the work that we are discussing gets done in silos. Folks that specialize in housing are going to propose recommendations in that space. Folks that are looking at how we build out our grid for energy and other essential services are going to focus exclusively on that. What we need is all of those disciplines to come to the table and work cooperatively to find better solutions together, not in silos. Because we know that working together, we can create better opportunities for innovation, and it's exactly what we need. We know that when bureaucracy works in those kinds of silos, it leads to delay or not the best outcomes in our community. So thinking about that, the collaboration that should occur internally, not just externally, is going to be critical. Inviting a diversity of voices to the table in ways that are effective, leveraging technology and leveraging community partners as well is going to be critical. We know that that's already happening, providing immediate relief, and we should not recreate the wheel. We should look at those networks that are being developed currently and access those for a stronger way of planning for the future. And I would add the following. I've been working with our elected officials, and there's a level of frustration of it that comes from this blame game that's currently happening. I know that folks are frustrated about the level of relief and the timing of support, but I do think that we need to recognize that our leaders are doing the best that they can with the resources that are available, and having the opportunity to move away from those divisive tactics and the blame mentality, I think is going to lead to more fruitful conversations at the local level. I realize it's hard, especially for people that are hurting at the moment, but I do think it's important to recognize the extraordinary work that our essential workers are doing, as well as our elected officials.
I completely agree, Alfred. I can't imagine the shock, the devastation, the heartache, the pain that so many people are feeling, and the natural reaction to look for the reasons why, right? And there will be a full recap, I'm sure, full investigations to identify where the system broke down or where we could do better in the future. But the goal today should be, as you mentioned, to come together in full transparency and earnest efforts to move forward and streamline these efforts, because right now it's all hands on deck, right? Just the thought of having to rebuild Los Angeles, which sounds so eerie for me to even have to say, is the key. And this is our home. We need to focus on solutions, opportunities, and success, which is something this program focuses on every week. I invite you to recommend other guests that are looking to do the work in earnest to serve our communities, to really advance these efforts and provide a bright future for us in the developmental process, right? Right now, it's unfortunately a charred slate, but at some point it will be a clean slate and a new canvas to start again, and to start again with 21st century goals, today's economic environment, and of course materials and opportunities that exist here today versus when our communities were being built decades ago. So thank you so much for your work. But with that said, Alfred, what are you most hopeful about as you look at this daunting and absolutely overwhelming task of putting in those first steps to do the planning, do the rezoning, get all the stakeholders to collaborate, to work and move in the same direction? What are you hopeful about in that sense?
Well, I always say that in these hard times and these moments of very challenging conditions, and some would say darkest times, is when you see the stars, is when you get to see those bright spots in the sky in our community. And we're seeing that all around us. A willingness to come together as Angelenos, as residents in this area, to help each other, to lend a hand, and to provide the relief that's needed. I would also say that there is a growing acknowledgement that unfortunately this will not be the last emergency condition or wildfires that we experience. And so having an acknowledgement of that as we rebuild, I think will be critical. There are other vulnerable communities out there that also need the same level of attention that we hope we would have placed in the communities that are now devastated. So thinking holistically, thinking in ways that are equitable and inclusive, thinking about more resilient communities and working with partners across different disciplines like we're doing at Somos, I think is a way out of this challenge.
Well, thank you so much for your time, for your expertise, and for hitting the ground running. You have the teams ready. You are prepared for a time like this. And just thank you for sharing your expertise and continuing the work.
Thank you, Yvette.
All right, for everybody listening, don't miss my conversation with Ted Alejandre, the 31st the 34th San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools. He was first elected to the county's lead educational seat in June of 2014 and was reelected in both 2018 and 22. He began his third consecutive four-year term in January 2023. With more than 3 decades of experience in public education, Mr. Alejandre has been a teacher, vice principal, principal, and director of fiscal services at the district level. Next week, we will have Garner Holt, founder and president of Garner Holt Productions. Garner started Garner Holt Productions age 16 in his parents' garage. Garner Holt Productions is now the largest creator of animatronics and other elements for theme parks, attractions, museums, and more, all from its 120,000 square foot California headquarters. Around the globe, Garner Holt Productions' work is nearly 5,000 animatronic figures created for Disney, Universal Studios, Warner Brothers, Lockheed Martin, Salesforce, Nike, Mattel, and dozens more. You do not want to miss it. We will see you all next week.